Hello, Dominique.
How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me?
I can. You look and sound
Oh,
great.
oh, great. You look and sound great. I'm so happy to meet you.
Oh, I'm thrilled to meet you too. I have been just doing a deep dive on Perry and have enjoyed your app
Yes.
so much. Have
Oh, I'm so
listened
happy to hear
to,
that.
oh my gosh, and the podcast that I've been listening to and your guests and everything and everybody. You guys are doing a great job and I'm so impressed.
Thank you so much. I mean, I can only give that back. That's why we invited you. I think there's such a great match with your mission and how you educate and how you are engaging with your audience. I'm so happy that we can meet today, really, Dominique. It's such an honor for us to for you to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, the feeling's mutual. So I'm excited to do this. And thank you also for forwarding the
Yes.
questions to me and kind of giving me a
Yeah,
heads up as to what your audience is looking for too. So I think it's going to be a really good, meaningful conversation.
absolutely.
And I even gathered some literature and things that have been given to me and sent to me, whatnot, just that I can share with your audience about grief in midlife. So I'm happy to do that.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Okay, perfect, Dominique. Well, I'm so happy that you're here. Welcome to the Perry Talks. I would love to kick it off. It's always best to hear it from our guests themselves. I would love to hear it from you, who you are, what you do, and what is your biggest perimenopause WTF symptom.
How much time do you have? That's my question. Oh my goodness. First of all, thank you so much for having me as a guest. I am so thrilled to be a part of the dialogue on your platform. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and what you all are doing and just exploring the conversations that you're having on the Perry app and the Perry podcast. And I think you are doing such an amazing service to women. I wish that there was this type of content available to me when I was in my 40s and going through perimenopause, because I was having those WTF moments where I'm like, what is going on? And why do I feel like my body is totally abandoning me? So I'll launch into that in just a minute. But I'm Dominique Sachse, for those of you who don't know. Perry, you guys reached out to me because you follow my social media platforms, YouTube and podcast. And I've been doing that now. The podcast actually launched this year, Over 50 and Flourishing. So that's a neat opportunity for me to be able to have these conversations about midlife and what women think about, face, transitions. We've already had menopause talks. We've had sex in midlife. We've had grief in midlife, which I know we're going to dive into quite a bit in this conversation. My YouTube channel has been around since 2014, and it's been a joyful place for me to connect with women. Back then, I was in my mid 40s, now my mid 50s. And it's like I said, a joyful space to do beauty, lifestyle, wellness. And then prior to that, I was a news anchor at the NBC station here in Houston, Texas for 28 years. So it's been a long, beautiful, and blessed journey with a
Yeah.
lot of pivots and transitions. And I'm grateful to be here. And to quickly answer your Perry WTF question, a couple of things hit me as I was going through perimenopause. I'm normally a glass half full kind of gal, very optimistic, always seeing the bright side and everything. And all of a sudden, I was just feeling grumpy, grouchy, irritable. Just I don't know, like I wanted to claw out of my skin at some days. It was really frustrating and I couldn't understand why. And at the time, I didn't realize that that was a perimenopause symptom of just feeling uncomfortable in your own skin as your estrogen level drops, that irritability and anxiety, which I'd never experienced before. And then, of course, the night sweats that would kick in like clockwork. I would be driving home from the newscast, and literally at 11 o'clock at night, I would just break out in this heat behind the steering wheel of my car. And I remember just dialing everything down to low and feeling, that cold air on me. And it was just a myriad of symptoms that thankfully I was able to manage when I finally got the proper care to manage my menopause. And I know a lot of your women are on that journey right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dominique. You see me silently responding. I would just want
Yes.
to, have your have your voice in there. And thank you so much for sharing. Would you mind sharing what your menopause transition has been and what has worked for you in terms of treatment, lifestyle?
Yes.
Just kind of sharing some tips and tricks, what has worked for you?
Oh my gosh, it's so many things and it's multi-pronged. So I can't really say it's one size fits all and one formula fits all, but what I do now know is that it's multi-pronged and it's all encompassing. So first for me was getting my hormone situation straight, which started with finding a menopause practitioner who not only did the blood work, but asked the questions about how I was feeling and wasn't basing my treatment solely based on what the numbers in the blood panel were saying. So estrogen started to get incorporated into my my menopause care, and the dosing of that would change as well until we started to mitigate the symptoms. Progesterone I had started early in my 40s, but I really think the big mistake was doing progesterone solely without the introduction of estrogen, because I had lost too much, and those symptoms that I was feeling was strictly based on the loss of estrogen. So there was that, dialing that in properly. I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism in my late 30s, so I was supplementing with compounded thyroid since then. So that was part of the equation. Also, sleep started to become an issue. So I was obviously, once my hormonal balance started to get a little bit more in play, sleep got better, but not perfect. So I started searching for natural remedies for sleep using things like melatonin, valerian root, 5-HTP, L-tryptophan, to help me fall asleep at night. Behavioral practices now factor in. Okay. So not staying up too late, not staying on digital devices, I use the Calm app to meditate and to wind down and do breath work before I go to bed, because I know how important that is to be able to get yourself into the proper place to be able to sleep. Dialing the thermostat down to a nice cool temperature is a big part of it. Sheets that are actually cooling. You know, it's amazing how many things play into this. Now let's go into diet. Getting sugar out of the diet, eating properly, more high protein foods, less carbohydrate foods. Exercise becomes a huge component, the consistency of that. Yoga, weight training for muscle tone, for bones. I mean, I can go on and on, but I think the story that I'm trying to paint here is that it's not,
really,
it's not a Band-Aid, and it's not one thing. It is a lifestyle that has to change as your body is going through the change.
absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dominique. I would love to come to, the topic of today, which is grief during midlife. You recently lost your mother, which I'm very sorry for. And you have been sharing this with so much openness, honesty, and transparency, which I'm sure so many of your community and also the ones close to you really appreciate. We hear that in our community a lot, that especially during midlife, in your mid 40s, many things come together, right? It's the hormonal changes, it's aging parents which might pass away, it's teenage kids. So it's really the perfect, imperfect storm of things which are happening. So I would love to now come to the questions of our community. I will read them out. They have all been, selected. Many came in. We just picked the top 5 ones to really make sure that you can share your experiences and the community can learn as well from your experiences and be inspired by them. I'm going to read them out, and then I would love to, dive into your answers.
Okay, perfect.
The first one. Hello, Dominique. My name is Cherry. I'm 46 and from St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been following you for a long time, and I'm so happy that you're a guest of the Peri Talks today. I absolutely do not like the perimenopause transition, but midlife has been in general a time of reflection for me. How did the loss of your mother influence your own life and the priorities you set for the future? Thank you so much, Dominique.
Great question. And thank you to her for asking that. I think that our priorities should always be shifting. And first of all, thank you for your comment about the loss of my mother and just my community's reaction to it. I have felt incredibly blessed by their support, and I have felt the need to share that journey, just as I felt the need to share my menopause journey with my audience. I think it's time to stop living with our heads in the sand and pretending like everything's okay when it's not okay. The more real we are, the more we can connect with others and maybe impart something that can help somebody else. And that's why we're all here. We're here to help people. I mean, that's why I started my platform, and I'm sure that that's why you started Peri, so people don't feel alone. regarding
Absolutely.
the loss of my mother and now thinking about things in the future, I think, you know, I and maybe a lot of us are like this. I had such a fantasy fairy tale vision of what this stage of life would be like, right? I I will have saved X amount of money. My son will be off to school. I'll be, in a place to be able to kind of be footloose and fancy free, and everything's going to be smooth sailing, and I'll be traveling, and, life will be just so great. And nobody really discussed, like you said, this perfect imperfect storm that takes place in midlife, which is you're going through intense physical changes, mental changes based on hormones. Nobody really talked about caring for aging parents. And that has become a huge component, a huge stressor of what we deal with now while we're going through this intense stress and pressure of our own, right? We're dealing with our own physicality. We're trying to manage that. We're dealing with our own relationships, whether it's with spouse, children, whatnot. And now we're also having to care for our parents. They are living longer. And it doesn't mean that the quality of life is necessarily better, right? And so when we talk about loss, I had a beautiful interview with a couple who started a Facebook group called Parenting Aging Parents. And it talks about this dynamic that we're discussing right now, is that there's actually a loss that can take place before you lose your parent from this earth. And that loss is mental, Alzheimer's, dementia. So many people are going through that. And it's not something that was talked about as much when I was growing up, that this could be a factor too, that the parent who raised you could no longer be that same person anymore. They may not even recognize you anymore. They may be belligerent toward you because of the dementia and the loss of mental faculty. And you're having to process that. That's a real loss while you're living and while they're living too. Not to mention what happens when they actually do pass. There's so much to think about and plan for. And what I love about what this couple is doing is that they provide people with a workbook, things to ask your parents, basic information, questions, things that we don't even think about, like social security number, personal information, bank accounts, health, life insurance records, all of these things that you have to have and know once your parent passes, or else it can put you in a tailspin of having to figure out all this information and plan and do all of that with family. In my particular case, my mother was so healthy, so vibrant. I think she too, we just mistakenly thought she'd live on forever. She seemed invincible in that way. So when it happened, it really caught me by surprise. I just wasn't expecting it. It was such a shock. It was, in her case, a full-on cardiac event that took place one night at a restaurant while out to dinner with some friends. And it made me realize, first of all, just how precious life is and what a gift every single day is. But we need to have a plan, because we just don't know what life has in store for us. We don't know how things are going to play out. So I think my talk to my future self is to start planning, to have these things in place as I age for me to better help my son, so that we don't just kind of go through life thinking it's going to be easy and carefree. These are important conversations that need to be had. And I guess I'll be better prepared in the future. And that'll be the message that I share with others, is just be better prepared. Start doing things now that you really wouldn't have even thought about maybe a week ago.
I love that, Dominique. And I love that because especially the topic of death can be such a, of course, it's a societal taboo, right? You don't want to
Yes.
think about it, you don't want to talk about it. And I find what you're saying so vitally important, to take matters into your own hand and to really say, have a conversation with your child, even though it's uncomfortable and even though it's so much in the future, right? But just saying, how can we both be as prepared as possible? I find that incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes, thank you. And we as women in midlife need to be having those conversations with our parents, as difficult as they are. there are door opening questions and things to ask to get the ball rolling on that. And that's the message that I want to spread, is that don't be shameful. Death is a part of life. And we have to understand that, embrace it, and not be fearful of it. Or, like you said, the perfect word is taboo, to not even discuss it. It is a conversation that needs to be had. No parent wants to put their child in a perilous situation when they pass. So how can we set things up so that doesn't happen?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dominique.
Yeah.
I would love to move to the next question. This is amazing. Thank you so much. The next one is coming from Emily. Hi, this is Emily from Austin, Texas, 43 years old, and I'm a huge fan of your YouTube channel. I also lost my mother 2 years ago, which pulled the rug under my feet away. I find it extremely difficult to juggle the grief with all the other responsibilities and peri stuff thrown my way. Work, my kids, heightened anxiety due to peri. All that while grieving is wearing me out. How do you juggle all these different responsibilities? Thank you.
Well, Emily, first of all, I am so sorry for your loss. 2 years, it doesn't matter how much time has passed, it's a loss. And one thing I have learned about grief is that you don't get over it, you get through it. It is a process. And I have been seeing a therapist to make sure that I am handling the process correctly. And I think, again, let's, break out a taboo. That's an important thing to share. If you are struggling with something, or if you don't want to struggle with something, feel free to get help. You deserve it. You want to make sure that you are not burying emotions or motoring through, which is exactly what can happen. Like Emily was saying, you get caught up in the minutia of life and all of the details, and it's a lot. You're feeling crummy and you're trying to figure yourself out. You're trying to handle and balance your children and your family, and you've got a career. And where is the time to properly process the grief for the parent that you lost? And it's important to do so. It is important for those tears to flow and allow them to when they are naturally coming out. It's also important, by the way, not to beat yourself up when a day goes by and you don't think about the parent that you've lost, because that can happen too. So grieving, you have to give yourself grace in the grief process. And I have found, and I want to share with your audience some things that have been passed on to me that have been extraordinarily helpful. So first of all, I had a guest on my podcast. His name is Mo Mays. He's a grief counselor, and he gave me these books, and it's a 4-part series, and you do one every couple of months. So basically you'll complete a year after reading these books. But it's A Time to Grieve, book number 1, Experiencing Grief, book number 2, Finding Hope and Healing, and then Rebuilding and Remembering. And then you're encouraged, after you finish the series, they give you an envelope to mail these to somebody who is experiencing a loss. So you get to basically pay it forward, which is a wonderful gift. So reading literature on processing grief is critical, just to make sure that you feel like you're not alone, that your feelings are normal, and there are ways to handle this process internally and conversations to have with others. Somebody gave me this book as well. It's called Grief One Day at a Time, 365 Meditations to Help You Heal After a Loss. So this is great, just like, your daily prayer book. Like, I love to read Jesus Calling, and I read my prayer for the day. It's the same thing. It's a meditation on handling loss. So this may be helpful for Emily as well. And then, just like you encourage your audience to do on Peri, you guys are big believers in journaling. And I am too. And I think, I've got a big journal here. And when my mother passed, I just, I started just pouring out my heart and thoughts and tears and even just the experience in the hospital and the details of that, and the moments where, friends came and they lifted me, and things that I will never forget, or words that the chaplain said, or, the wonderful nurse who came in and played music for my mother, even though she was completely unconscious. They said that deep down they can still hear. And so there are all of these wonderful things that happen during the most brutal and excruciating time that I don't want to forget. So I think all of that is part of the process. But my encouragement to Emily is, please carve out time for you to be able to think about, process, and deal with your grief. You deserve that. And I think the worst thing is motoring through life and not fully penetrating and allowing those emotions to process and come out like they need to.
Yeah, I find that very powerful, Dominique. And that's also something I feel like we have always been trained, especially as women. I don't want to stereotype, but just to plow through, to not allow things, to say everything, like you were saying, everything is fine, everything is great. You shouldn't feel worse, you shouldn't feel bad for more than a week. So I think it's so powerful in saying, allow it time, allow also days where you're not sad, but it's a process and you can't, that's something if you speed through it, it will get worse.
Yeah, I think that word should or shouldn't, those two need to be annihilated, because that's judgment cast from others, right? That those are opinions based on other models and paradigms that really serve no role or purpose in your life. And the last thing that I will add, I mean, you see me wearing my cross necklace, and I generally do. My faith is my cornerstone. It is my beginning, middle, and end of my day. It's conversations that I have with God throughout that get me through. And I really, really don't want to negate the importance of whatever your belief system is, to press into that and to realize that there's so much comfort that can come from your conversation with God. And He is there, He's there by our side, and He is there to lift us and help us, especially in the darkest of times. When we come
Yeah.
to Him, He runs to us.
There are not that many who can talk with that much empathy. So I really want to thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. That's such a sweet thing to say, and I really, really appreciate it. And I hope, my feeling is if you touch one, you've done your job. So hopefully we've touched one and then some. So thank you, and thanks for what you're doing
Absolutely.
too. I think it's really, really, really great. Really great.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dominique.